Hey folks, John Santo here, coming at you very much live and direct. But for everybody who's going to watch this, it won't be live and direct, but that's okay. I'm with Schu. Schu, how are you, sir?
I'm doing all right. You always wonder when you see the live in the corner and you're
Yeah.
watching it in some recorded capacity, how confusing or how misleading that ultimately is.
Well, it's only misleading and confusing to people who watch it later, but the live thing isn't there anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Oh, fair enough. All right.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
you know, the Google Hangout folks are brilliant then.
Exactly.
Clearly smarter than I am, and I applaud them for that as a result. No wonder you can run a billion plus. You come up with the little things. It's all about the details when you have a company that's worth, more than most companies are. So, they can come up with little things like that then don't bother people, and it makes old folks like me just sound as outdated and obsolete as we ultimately are.
Well, I'm glad you look at yourself with such a positive attitude. So I actually, yeah, really. Hold on one second here. I'm actually going to take the hoodie off because it is actually warmed up again.
So really, it's fluctuated that dramatically. This is good because look at that.
Look at that.
That's some good that's some good moviedom on that shirt right there.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is this is from Scientist Steph got this for me. It's the Art Institute of Chicago.
Nice.
When she and her boyfriend just went there for some stuff.
It was nice for her to get the shirt. It looks sort of scientific.
Sure.
We can only see the top rung on the top. I see the what I believe is a classic painting, the classic old family with the rake painting.
Yeah. So that's Whistler's. No, not Whistler's mother. American Gothic.
Yeah, something like that.
And
right.
then there's a famous.
We're really impressing the folks out there with our humanities knowledge.
Yeah, completely right. So let's pop right into this, sir. You are the resident Godzilla expert.
I don't know how in the hell you could possibly come to that conclusion.
So how many toys do you have? Did you count them when you cleaned?
Wait. Did you just call them toys?
Sorry, collectibles.
Really? You just called them toys? Wow. I probably have, and now I know there will be a raid on the apartment. Raid. The taking of apartment Pelham 13. I think if you appraised them, we'd be in the 10 to 15K area.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that you can, and some of the one that you see over my right shoulder here, which isn't as impressive as some of the other figures. I think if you go back and watch some of the other older FGPs, occasionally different Godzillas make random appearances because they're not camera shy.
Right.
This one is a more difficult to find figure. He's a Bandai figure from the late 80s and is worth a pretty penny.
Nice.
Maybe even more than a pretty penny because I guess technically pennies are pennies whether they're pretty or not.
Sure. So on the physical count of how many you actually own,
oh my goodness,
do you have a record?
I have not kept a record. It's significant.
Yeah. So
I don't know exact number, and there's probably some weird Godzilla stuff over the years. El Tremendo and I recently went through the apartment and cleaned a lot of stuff up, which is unfortunate only in this circumstance. It's great that it was helpful, but instead of at the moment having a bunch of the Godzilla toys.
Sorry, what do you call them officially? Collectibles?
I don't know, whatever the hell you want to call them other than they're all in tubs now, locked away in a closet, all trying to get out. A few of them have remained out, but many of them have been put away, hopefully temporarily, but we'll ultimately see how that goes. But there are many.
Yeah, there's a ton.
There's a lot. Yeah.
So
it's incredible that I'm single.
So yeah, shocking, totally shocking. Yet you have a girlfriend and I don't. But maybe it's because I haven't fixed the fire alarm yet on my house.
Is that the reason?
Yeah, that's got to be it, right? That's the only thing keeping me from it.
Women come over all the time, and you go through the process, and they see that, and they instantly leave.
Yeah, that's the deal breaker. That's the total deal breaker.
They're really impressed with the shirt overall, but
with my charming personality and
the humanities shirt, clearly our art knowledge, but unfortunately they look at the fire alarm and it's over.
Yeah, pretty much.
California women are an odd lot. I feel bad for you.
Yeah, I don't know. I just can't put it together.
You're a serious catch. Now, however, that you're on Film Geek Primer and broadcasting live via a Google Hangout on YouTube, you know, the groupies are going to swarm to you, so be prepared for that.
Oh yeah, I'm all ready for that one.
Oh yeah, good.
So let's just kind of go back in time and get a little personal history here. When did Godzilla kind of come into your life? Because this is I've known you for over 20 years now, and I wouldn't say it's an obsession, but it's definitely one of those things that you always keep your eyes open out for new Godzillas. You've kind of always got there are specific toys, specific collectibles that you're always kind of looking for and stuff like that. At what point in your life did kind of Godzilla enter? Why? Where did the kind of craze and love for this character and the kaijus and just kind of because you also like Johnny Sacco and all the other dudes and stuff like that. So
Man and Ultraman.
Yeah. So where did that spark come from?
Because I was a whacked kid, I suppose. I think I was introduced to it. I'm a little bit, maybe a lot older than you are, and remember the advent of cable. Maybe a little bit better than you. I don't know exactly.
No, I'm pretty much on there at the same time.
Okay, we're talking late 70s-ish, and there were some of the initial cable television outlets when when you got past the whole, and for a lot of younger folks in the listening audience, you used to watch TV and there would be a UHF switch after you got past the first 13 channels, and you'd have to move that one little button through a bunch of static to try to get some other antenna-based channels higher up on the ladder.
Right.
Then cable came into the equation, and you could get a little bit more. HBO, of course, was included. I am from that generation that went out of its way to try to see what boobies I possibly could, and did so with the squirrely lines because we didn't have the subscription to HBO.
Oh yeah, no, we were a generation. We were the last generation to have to try to smuggle porn in a weird way. You know, it's like there was, or actually there's probably like some slightly younger than us, but kids these days are going to have like no clue as to how tough it was for us to try to abscond with images of breasts or any kind of female anatomy.
They can't even comprehend.
No.
So I again apologize for the younger folks out there who are completely baffled by my reference to the squiggly line as you tried to make out some picture on co-opted HBO, blacked out HBO. If you didn't have the subscription, it wasn't that you totally lost the signal. It was that the signal was fractured.
Yeah.
But in the midst of the fracture, you could watch a fair amount of videos, or rather movies, hoping that you might be able to see, you know, a little booby here and there.
Yeah,
and
it would be a scrambled signal, and sometimes it would clear up just kind of enough where you might catch something.
And then if you were pitiful like I was and am, you'd continue that procedure. You'd look onto the TV guide to see when that movie came up again so that you could go through the process a few more times. Anyway, advent of cable also led to more television stations from a variety of different locations. Los Angeles, I think it was KTLA, that had a cable channel that was broadcast across the country. There was a station in San Francisco. I'm going to forget the call letters. WTBS, WTBS in Atlanta, WGN, WOR, few of them out there. But it was the LA and the San Francisco stations that played a lot of the Japanese monster stuff. In addition, there was a station in Phoenix, Arizona that played a Saturday morning movie program that is called The World Beyond.
Yep, yeah, good old KPHO. Does KPHO still do stuff like that?
I don't think it does.
Yeah.
It has since transitioned into a network deal. It's not independent any longer. And I think as a result of that, The World Beyond is beyond this world.
Right.
But on The World Beyond, they played a bunch of monster movies. And in the monster movie rotation was a lot of the Godzilla films. A lot of the black and white Universal horror films were in that mix as well, but they didn't do a whole heck of a lot for me. But for some reason, the Godzilla movies and the Japanese monster movies when I was younger did. I liked the idea of a big monster coming into town and, you know, crushing buildings and stuff. And I liked the idea of monsters fighting monsters. I thought that was pretty cool. It was probably an extension of the classic dinosaur phase that a lot of kids go through. So this fit, and I went through that. This fit into that reasonably well. And then, you know, I aged a little bit. And once I started to graduate into scrambled boobies on HBO and Showtime, I wasn't watching Godzilla as consistently and sort of got out of the habit, but it was always something that sort of stuck there. Fast forward to the early 90s, and I go into a comic book store one day, and son of a bitch if they don't have a bunch of Bandai Godzilla figures. And
Gotcha.
the first one I bought was a Mecha King Ghidorah. Mecha King Ghidorah is this guy. Okay, I don't know if you can see him. That's Ghidorah right there. King Ghidorah is a classic Godzilla monster.
Yep.
And as the new Godzilla franchise continues to get made, there's a likelihood that this guy's going to make an appearance. Okay? And a few of the other Japanese monsters from this realm are going to as well. But there was one of the middle Ghidorah head was metallic, mechanized, as opposed to being the two live heads on the side on, you know, this basic mini Hydra, if you will. And I thought that was cool and had no idea where the flip it came from. So I bought Mecha King Ghidorah, and that kicked off what I admittedly possess. I occasionally go into collecting binges.
Right.
And that started the Godzilla action figure, collectible, toy, whatever you want to...
figurine, sure, whatever.
Figurine routine, and that lasted for quite a few years, up until the point where it pretty much bankrupted me.
Right.
But I also tend to admittedly be... This is more a therapy session than it is a history lesson on Godzilla. But I also tend to be a hoarder, and of the collections that I've managed to, at one point, go through the process of, I haven't thrown any of those out. Those are sort of sacred, and they have a place. So all of those Godzilla figures I kept and still have now in a variety of locations, in tubs in the closet. Maybe one day they'll make an appearance. But yeah, that
buried
broke out
throughout America.
Yes, precisely. When I live on a beach in Ecuador, they'll wonder, what in the living hell did we get in allowing this expat into the country? But I'll be telling them, hey, Godzilla never attacks Ecuador. So I'll ultimately feel safe there. That's basically the gist of the figures, and I just haven't felt like getting rid of them and still have something of a connection. So it's a two-tier thing. There was a childhood connection to the dinosaur Japanese monster thing that later manifested itself into some sort of younger adult geekdom that, to a large degree, even though I don't go crazy buying the figures, will ignore that last night I drove around for about 75 minutes looking for toys for the new Godzilla figures to see if there was anything I actually liked there. We'll forget that actually happened and pretend that it didn't. But generally speaking, I've toned that down a fair amount to this day, but still have a close connection to Godzilla. Hopefully along the way I recognize, what it is and, where it is, but undoubtedly I will be ridiculously critical and potentially vitriolic once the movie comes out in the not-too-distant future.
Not-too-distant future, yeah, about 2 weeks away, or just over a week away, actually.
Speaking of which, I may be watching a midnight showing with with the kid of a friend of mine.
Oh, nice.
Who is about 12 years old and a huge Godzilla fan. He is the second kid, friend of mine who's, a parent, got a kid's a Godzilla fan. So there's still something out there. Godzilla is still attractive, and I think it probably has a lot to do with the dinosaur thing.
Right, yeah, I wouldn't doubt that.
And there is a Godzilla appeal that still remains among 12-year-olds who sort of have a nerd or a geek tendency.
Sure. So let's then move into the history of Godzilla. You of course, I'm leaving this all up to you. You're the one with a huge amount of knowledge and all of this stuff. So there have been, how many phases of Godzilla films have taken place?
I think you could argue there have been 2 solid phases, and then a more latter sporadic phase that I think you could probably favorably argue. I think this Godzilla's, as much as it's been marketed, as much as they've been building it up, as much as they're hyping the effects and the previews, I think they believe, and probably rightfully so, that this Godzilla movie is going to make a lot of money, and they bank on it being a long-term franchise of some sort. So we could argue. So I think you could favorably argue that this is either the third phase, the beginning of the third phase, or the first legitimate American phase.
I was going to say, yeah, because we've never had a. There have been several attempts in America actually to Americanize Godzilla, although in most cases they have been Japanese films that have been dubbed or recut even to try to appeal to an American audience. And then, of course, we have the whole Devlin Emmerich debacle of '98. So you know, I guess then let's look at Toho. They've always been a Toho, right?
Yes, and still are.
Still are. Okay. And
Toho still holds on to the rights and is fascinatingly protective about the franchise.
Right.
And considering that there are a lot of Godzilla movies out there that really aren't very good, their protection of what Godzilla is and how it's presented remains kind of interesting. But they are they're very particular about that aspect of it. And to some degree, I guess it's good news in advance that they have, even though a fair portion of the socially media-connected Japanese population might consider Godzilla a little hefty, Toho at least has given it its blessing based on what it's seen so far. So I suppose that's a good thing. Toho created the initial Godzilla in 1954. This is the 60th anniversary of that initial incarnation.
Wow. Okay.
I suspect it was supposed to be a one-off. It was just a movie that touched on the horrors of nuclear proliferation.
Sure. Oh, I mean, the original film is not built to look or feel like anything like it's supposed to be a franchise. I mean, it is a singular story with a very focused idea of what it's trying to tell us.
Yep. And then I think later on, when they discovered there might be something here, I think they recognized there might be a little bank in it as well and decided, all right, let's make some more of these. So they cranked out a fair amount of Godzilla films, close to one a year between 56 and 74 or 75.
Wow, okay.
You know, there were a lot of monsters that they added during that time frame. And Godzilla sort of morphed from... Godzilla has sort of waffled... from a motivational standpoint as well. In the initial movie, Godzilla is not good, not bad. It's just a representation of something else that could heinously go wrong. Okay? Right. Godzilla is symbolism. Godzilla is radioactive nuclear proliferation symbolism in the initial film.
Right.
From more or less from that point on, Godzilla takes on some different manifestations, sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes sort of neutral. And as it progresses into the 60s and early 70s, it also becomes much more kid-friendly. The demographic definitely dips from what the original was, being a fairly serious movie, to being a movie where you see a variety of different things like, Godzilla jumping up and down, Godzilla holding his crotch, Godzilla having a baby Godzilla with another kid around, and the baby Godzilla's blowing smoke rings. There was a lot of cuteness that came into the latter portion of the first era of Godzilla, which concluded in 74, 75 with a couple of the Mechagodzilla films. Then Godzilla went on hiatus for about a 10-year period. There was an attempt, again with Raymond Burr, that was made in 84, 85. That didn't do particularly well, but it sort of is a...
And that was Godzilla 1985, I think, was the title, right?
Right.
Now, was that American made, or was that another Japanese film that was made and they actually brought Burr over this time to be in the film to try to kind of cross-pollinate?
I think it's a little of both.
Okay.
I think that there's a lot of Americanization in that one. And again, it was sort of a standalone. Then the Japanese brought the franchise back in the late 80s with Godzilla versus King Ghidorah.
Right. Sorry. Just I pulled up the Wikipedia just so I could actually throw out some specific titles. Apparently, Godzilla 1985 was officially a American production.
Okay.
Co-produced. It looks like Koji Hashimoto was listed as one of the directors on it. So that's interesting. Maybe there's a little more going on here than I think. Hold on, go on. So continue.
There's definitely a lot of Americanization in that one, but I think again you've got plenty of Japanese influence incorporated into it as well.
Yeah, actually, I think they did the exact same thing. It looks like it was originally called The Return of Godzilla, and it was released in 1984 in Japan, and then released in 1985 in America. So it looks like there's definitely a co-production kind of angle here. And there's a monster in it that I'd never heard of called Shakirus. Mm-hmm. So don't know if that rings a bell to you.
Admittedly, it's been a while since I've seen that one.
Sure.
But beyond that, again, that one is sort of in a standalone period.
Right.
And it didn't do particularly well. And then they waited 3 or 4 years, and Toho brought the franchise back again. And then it started, and it kind of coincided. I think maybe this is coincidental, maybe it's intentional, with little kids like me now being young adults and kind of digging what they remembered when they were a kid, hoping that the new Godzilla gave them what they wanted. And
sure.
I think there was a sort of pride that followed up with Godzilla in Japan as well. I think as time went on, I think Godzilla to some degree in Japan is sort of similar to our version of Star Trek. Or some of those other franchises that you put on the shelf a little bit and then you bring back, and then there's excitement about the return.
Would you almost say that he's kind of Japan's Mickey Mouse?
I think there's probably a better. Ultraman. Oddly enough, Ultraman is probably Japan's Mickey Mouse.
Okay.
Ultraman's a huge deal in Japan. And an immense cultural phenomenon in Japan, and remains that way to this day. Whereas we recognize Mickey Mouse or Bugs Bunny, not that a Japanese person wouldn't recognize those iconic images as well, but they have significantly more familiarity with what Ultraman is.
Right.
And I think enjoy Ultraman's kitschiness in addition to the rest of it far more than we recognize over here.
Fair enough, yeah.
So Ultraman is probably the better Mickey Mouse comparison. I think Godzilla is sort of there, and I'll go back to Star Trek here because it's the one off the top of my head. Well, you can pick any of a number of superhero franchises and throw them into this category. But let's use Star Trek, okay? The series has its run in the late 60s. It's on for 3 years. It gets a second life in syndication, but for the most part, it's kind of, you're aware that it's there, but it's kind of off. It's kind of out of the context. Yeah. Shatner and Nimoy and everybody else, they're doing a bunch of other things in some ridiculous projects. They're trying to piecemeal careers.
Right.
But then Paramount recognizes, you know what? Why don't we try that? It's been 10 years. Why don't we try the movie thing? After the success of Star Wars, right, they bring back the Star Trek franchise, and they discover that there are a lot of folks out there that really love Star Trek.
Sure.
And then that works into the number of movies that we saw, the number of series we saw, and Star Trek in that second incarnation runs for what, 25 years?
Yeah, I mean, in one form or another, yeah. If we want to throw in Enterprise and
you could
Voyager
argue
and all those, yeah.
Continues with the J.J. Abrams reboots.
Right.
I think Godzilla was similar to that for Japan.
Gotcha.
There was a revisionist enjoyment and maybe a pride that it was theirs.
Right.
And they could appreciate that, and they could be proud of that. Even if the movies weren't particularly good, Godzilla was theirs, and Godzilla was something of theirs that was internationally recognized.
Right.
I think that, and I think that meant a lot to them in a way that maybe folks who like Star Trek gravitate onto that. Sure. I could use this comparison for a Batman, for any of a number of sci-fi, different sci-fi elements that are ultimately out there.
Sure.
So then they wrap up Godzilla in about the mid, what am I looking at, 2000, 2001, somewhere in that general neighborhood.
Yeah, Final Wars actually was 2004.
Okay. So you're looking at another 16-year run.
Yeah.
The second period is a 16-year run, and then I think they recognized that it got kind of stale. It wasn't as good at the box office. It was sort of losing its appeal, and I remember at the time an executive for Toho, don't remember his exact position, said at the time, we're going to shelf this for about 10 years until we can get the effects up to speed. And here we are, 10 years later,
Right.
with a movie that probably will blow every other Godzilla film away from an overall effect standpoint. Will it hold up from a story standpoint, from an interest standpoint? Will it be a good movie? Those are things we'll discover in the not-too-distant future.
Sure. And one of the things I was noticing here was I always figured Godzilla versus King Kong was going to be was going to be kind of one of those, okay, we're running out of ideas and monsters to play with. Let's put them up against King Kong. But it was the third film that they made.
Yes.
1962 King Kong versus Godzilla. That's fascinating.
And it's a horrible film.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Well, I'm not surprised.
I think
it's a Shiro Honda, the original director of Godzilla, was not there for the second film, which was Godzilla Raids Again in 1955. And then it was interesting because it was like between 54, 55, and then it was a 7-year break before 1962 with Godzilla vs. King Kong. Yeah, and then
they were also at this time. Toho also at this time was branching off into some other franchises as well, or side monsters. Okay, there's a Toho monster canon that includes Rodan that was made in 1957. Rodan, I think, is the second half of Rodan. I think is a pretty damn good movie.
Okay.
It's a pretty good movie for 45 minutes. It kicks in at the second half. The first half's pretty slow. It has the best ending of any monster movie I've ever seen. And then they broke up, and then Mothra was in this period as well. And so I think they were trying to figure out, well, if Godzilla works, can we make other monsters equally as effective? And they did discover that Mothra had immense appeal in Japan, but pretty much no appeal anywhere else.
Right.
And then after that, they moved from that point. They had Godzilla versus King Kong, and then from that point on, there are a lot of Godzilla movies that have a bunch of other monsters and monsters that we had seen in their own films earlier on.
Gotcha.
So
So
it's like the Japanese monster Avengers, if you will.
Right.
You know, it's not unlike that general sort of scope.
Right.
And,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's all right. You know, so you're looking at Rodan and Mothra being in the same movie, and they're fighting Ghidorah in I think Godzilla versus the Thing, which is 1964 or 65. Monster X is in that general vein as well.
Right.
And then beyond that, they start to make a few more monsters after the Ghidorah run. King Ghidorah was the first. That's this guy here.
Yep.
Three-headed monster, always controlled by space aliens. Okay,
Right.
so Godzilla sort of ventured off into this weird space alien time frame, and Ghidorah was the evil creature. It was kind of like, I don't know, Best of the Best. You know, the space aliens would have their big-ass monster come in, and then Godzilla or the Mothra twins or some combination of Mothra and Rodan would have to all get together to ultimately fight and defeat Ghidorah, who in a one-off was apparently the strongest of the bunch. But
Right.
Godzilla and his gang would basically always cheat and gang up on him and never fight Ghidorah in a fair fight.
Right. Well, you know, these things happen. So then, when they bring back Godzilla in '64, it's Mothra versus Godzilla.
Right.
So as you're saying, Mothra then had already been created as a character before that.
Mothra was already established.
Okay. And go ahead. Sorry.
Mothra is one of the important. Mothra is very important in this mix. Mothra always beat Godzilla. There are three general rules of thumb with Godzilla monster characterizations. Okay, and they are, with Godzilla's, you can't really figure it out. Sometimes bad, sometimes good, sometimes symbol of something else. Okay,
Right.
Sometimes helps humans, sometimes destroys cities. Moody.
Right.
Mothra is always good. Mothra is always on humanity's side. King Ghidorah is always bad. Everything else is kind of all over the board. But those are the basic character tenets of the Godzilla canon.
Okay.
So in this period, yeah. So you've got this period, John, or rather Santo, where you have Mothra, Rodan, Godzilla, and there are a few other sporadic monsters who are tossed into this mix as well, but those are generally the most recognizable of the bunch. They introduce King Ghidorah, and Ghidorah is always sort of the fixture bad monster.
And Ghidorah was introduced only in a Godzilla film, or was there a Ghidorah movie first?
There was not a Ghidorah movie. Ghidorah was introduced only in a Godzilla film.
Godzilla as the heavy, okay.
And as a complete loser geek, when I had a Kimball organ, I would play the King Ghidorah theme song.
Nice.
Yeah, which was basically holding down a bunch of keys high up on the keyboard and pressing them for a long period of time. It would sound like but you had to get the tone just right. And I would do it for long periods of time, and I'm sure the parents were thrilled.
I'm sure they were very excited about that one.
Now, by virtue of mentioning that, I can understand why my dad spent a lot of time in other cities.
Right.
I think I know. All these years, I wondered that.
So, so after King Kong versus Godzilla in '62, he took a 2-year hiatus. Then it came with the 1-2 punch in 1964 of Mothra versus Godzilla and Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Both of those '64, both of those again directed by Honda. And Honda directed, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 Godzilla movies.
And I think you could fairly argue that more often than not, at least in that period, the Honda movies are the better ones.
Right.
And even if the stories are generally the same and they don't have a lot of, deeper meaning like the first one did, Honda did a generally good job of making those better films.
Right. Yeah, and actually, then Jun Fukuda did 2 of them. So the ones that Honda came back and did after Ghidorah, he did Invasion of Astro Monster, also known as Monster Zero, or Godzilla versus Monster Zero.
And Monster Zero is King Ghidorah.
Okay, so that's interesting. So they do Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, but then they come back with him
with
as
another
Monster
Ghidorah
Zero?
film. Yeah. And I think there's a possibility, you might look this up really quickly. I probably could if I had the internet. I'm going to try to remember. There's a possibility they filmed 2 of those at the same time.
Okay.
And broke those off into ultimately 2 separate films.
Gotcha. Yeah.
There's a fair amount of similarity to the general concept of those 2. One's a little bit more space alien heavy, but they're generally reasonably well done.
Right. Now the '64 one, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, features Ghidorah, Mothra, and Rodan. That's the one where Godzilla, Mothra, and Rodan have the little conversation off to the side, right?
Yes, they have the conversation.
That's a great scene.
They have the conversation off to the side, and the Mothra twins are translating the conversation because, of course, the Mothra twins speak monster.
Right.
I mean, fortunately,
and the monster and the Mothra twins are 2 little girls. Are they space aliens?
No, I don't think so. I think they are.
They're just like
there's some sort of symbolic representation of what the primitive island is that they come from.
Okay.
Mothra is their protector, and they are the
inhabitants of that island.
That ultimately summons Mothra if the island is in danger. Okay? I think the thought process here is that they are aware that there are other creatures out there who could cause problems, and Mothra is their protector.
Gotcha.
Okay? So they summon Mothra and do a really nice song and dance in the original one. And every once in a while, other movies will reference it as well. That's kind of this primitive, little dance chant thing that brings Mothra from its cocoony state back to a point of existence.
Right.
Mothra is at some point classic worm.
Right. Yeah, the little larva. Yeah, and he spits the
webbing.
Webbing. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It spits his cocoon and always entraps Godzilla as a result of it.
Right.
You look at the 2 and you think there's no way Mothra could beat Godzilla.
Right.
Yet Mothra was kind of like that sports team that isn't as good as you are but always has your number.
Sure.
That was sort of Mothra.
Gotcha.
And so there's this scene in the movie that you referenced where the Mothra twins are trying to recruit Rodan and Godzilla to help defeat King Ghidorah.
Okay.
because the space aliens have come in. They're going to take over the world, and the Mothra fairies know, the Mothra twins and the Mothra fairies, they know that Mothra cannot beat Ghidorah alone. So Mothra needs help. They also know that if Rodan and Godzilla don't come along, Mothra's going to fight him anyway.
Right.
Okay? And Mothra's going to lose, and now this thing's going to go in a direction that they don't want it to go.
Right.
So
and doesn't it play out like some kind of like weird kind of ego thing too? It's like, well, come on. I mean, if you're that kind of wussy, you don't want to fight them.
I think that's a little part of it. But
There's some weird line in there that cracked me up. I remember seeing it when I saw it.
Part of the conversation is Mothra's all in, okay? And Mothra's going to protect Earth. Mothra's going to try to protect Earth, protect the island / protect Earth. Rodan is sort of, I don't really like this idea, but maybe I can be talked into it. And
Right.
Godzilla's just completely pissed off, okay?
Right.
And Godzilla argues, as the monsters are arguing, Godzilla's arguing with Mothra, basically saying, these humans just want to kill us all the time.
Right.
Why in the world are we here ultimately trying to protect the humans? I don't care about them. And there's this one line specifically where it goes back and forth between the monsters chattering and the Mothra twins providing translation dialogue.
Right.
And Godzilla says something abrupt.
Right. Yeah.
And the Mothra twins say, all surprised and shocked and dumbfounded, Godzilla, what terrible language!
Right.
And it's it's a fantastic. I want to get the uncut version of that to see in subtitles what it was that Godzilla actually said.
Do they ever translate Godzilla's shrieks into subtitles of any sort?
No, but darn it, they should. Maybe the new Blu-rays do.
Maybe so. That would be great.
I don't know. So ultimately, of course, they all get together. They convince Godzilla to join this. Rodan, Godzilla, Mothra fight King Ghidorah, beat King Ghidorah. The space aliens are pushed back.
Right, and that's in Ghidorah, the three-headed monster from 1964.
And that is the first movie where Godzilla more or less transitions from being bad monster to good monster.
Gotcha.
Reluctant hero monster.
Right,
if you will. Yes, and then shortly thereafter is where Godzilla becomes a little bit more kiddie. And a lot of the movies in the latter portion, pretty much from 68 or 69 on, are a lot more geared toward Godzilla kind of being a protector of Earth. Right. Godzilla sort of takes over the role of Mothra. Mothra's pushed to the side and doesn't appear in a significant amount of these movies. The best movie of... Go ahead, John.
I was just going to ask, what year did they introduce... what film and year did they introduce Monster Island?
Monster Island is, to the best... Monster Island, I think, is introduced in the second film.
Okay.
But it's very brief, and it's
Gotcha.
a very brief mention. I don't recall it making another appearance, and I could be wrong about this, but its major reference point is in what I consider, and probably many others consider, the best of the group if it isn't the original, and that's Destroy All Monsters.
Yep, 1968, Destroy All Monsters.
1968's Destroy All Monsters is a fantastic Japanese monster movie.
Yeah, also directed by Honda.
Yes. It is the last of the really good, if you know, keeping in mind what we're talking about here.
Scale, sure, yeah.
The really good first grouping, and probably the last of the really consistently serious Godzilla movies as well.
Right.
That were geared toward an older demographic. Its opening, for about 30 to 45 minutes, it's pure chaos.
Yeah.
You have every monster you can imagine in the Toho canon getting released from Monster Island. There's this whole build-up at the beginning where a narrator explains what Monster Island is and how and how humans have kept the monsters on the island through a variety of technological achievements. The best scene in that is the scene with Rodan, because there is zero way in American culture that this could be done.
Right.
He talks about how Rodan, it's basically Rodan gets a little bit of a dome, and Rodan can swoop and get some ocean creatures as a result. So you see this scene where Rodan chooses to swoop down and picks up a dolphin.
Nice.
Picks up the dolphin and decides to carry it back to the nest.
Nice.
Okay. There is zero way that any American movie or any monster movie with a giant pterodactyl would have the pterodactyl swooping into the ocean and taking a dolphin.
Sure.
Other
Yeah.
than Japan.
Yeah. No, they would make it like a shark or something like more
Yes.
vicious, right?
Uh-huh.
But yeah, dolphin, seal, anything that we could consider a pet or make another movie with, probably
You're right.
not.
I don't think walrus would work either, but there's no way. Dolphins at the top of the
No,
list.
dolphins are the top of the list. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but then space aliens come in. They figure out how to shut down Monster Island. So the monsters just create complete havoc.
Right.
And Mothra runs over a train in Beijing, which I think at the time is Peking. Godzilla shows up and destroys New York. Rodan's running rampant in another location. I think Morosaurus is crushing from underneath the Arc de Triomphe. It's just it's glorious.
Yeah.
It's absolute glorious monster chaos.
So Anguirus, is that correct?
Anguirus, yes.
Anguirus, Baragon, Gorosaurus, who you mentioned, King Ghidorah, Kumongo. Don't know Kumongo. Is that the which one was the snake? There's Manda. There's Manila.
Manda is the snake.
Manda?
Ika is the spider. I think they make brief appearances as well.
Yeah, Mania or Manila. Mothra.
That's Minya. That's
Minya.
Baby.
Minya. Okay, so it's two L's. Got it.
What you get as well is a lot of these movies were, as a lot of Asian films were translated by British voice actors quickly.
Okay.
So the spelling won't match up with the pronunciation. So my pronunciation of what I remember when I listened to these British accented English language versions is different than how they're probably actually supposed to be pronounced in America.
Sure.
So I remember not Manila or whatever it is. I remember Minya.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I don't remember it. For years, it's been tough to me to pronounce King Ghidorah.
Right.
I always heard it. They always pronounce it as Ghidra.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of that in translation that's taking place. So okay, you'll look at a spelling in front of you, Santo, that looks like a completely different monster, but that's the monster that they're referencing.
Right. And who's Varon or Varan?
Varon, yeah.
Varon.
Varon was a one-off attempted one-off monster movie in its own right.
Okay. So
there are a few of those that are fairly forgettable that kind of make appearances, or forgettable / didn't really catch on with the American audiences, so we didn't see them as regularly as some of the what we would consider the top line Godzilla grouping.
Right.
But they all made appearances here, so a lot of those monsters may be a little foreign, but they all had their one-off. Generally had one-offs as well.
Okay, and I'm looking at this here, and it says so. Godzilla vs. Gigan was 1972. Now she had his own movie, right?
Gigan does not have its own movie. Gigan is only in 2 Godzilla films.
Interesting. Okay, for some reason I always thought Gigan was big enough that he had his own movie.
Gigan is another space monster and makes appearances as Ghidorah's ally.
Okay.
So you have a couple movies in that grouping where it's Godzilla and another monster against Gigan and King Ghidorah.
Gotcha.
So it's a tag team match.
Right. So then first appearance would have been 1972 in Godzilla vs. Gigan.
Right.
Got it.
And there's one right after it. There's another Gigan movie right after it.
And then there's Godzilla vs. Megalon that has Gigan in it as well as Jet Jaguar. And,
Jet Jaguar and King Caesar are in that movie,
and Megalon as well. Mm-hmm. King Caesar. Well, according to this, King Caesar doesn't show up until Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla.
Right. That's correct. Yes.
And then
there are 2 back-to-back Mechagodzilla movies, and those are the end of the first grouping of Godzilla films.
Right, and all of these, with the exception of Godzilla vs. Hedorah, all of them were either directed by Ishiro Honda or Jun Fukuda, excuse me, or Fukuda, depending on how you go with your
depends on how the British pronounce it.
Yeah. And that took us up to 75, which I guess would have been the end of that first phase.
Correct. That's correct.
And then there was there's the quasi kind of want to come back with Return of Godzilla / Godzilla 1985.
Right.
Godzilla versus Biollante in 1989, which is interesting. I thought that one came much earlier. And then really it doesn't. It kicks in again back in 1991 with Godzilla versus King Ghidorah.
King Ghidorah, right. Yeah, Biollante, and we mentioned at the top, I apologize for the inaccuracy. My recollection at the time was that King Ghidorah was the first movie on the return, but Biollante was the first movie on the return. And Biollante is this big plant monster.
Right.
It's a different approach, and it's not too bad, and the effects are obviously dated by our standards, but significantly better than they were in the 60s and 70s. And very differently laid out, and Godzilla looks entirely different, and I think you could fairly argue much better.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of effort put into making Godzilla look a little bit more ominous than he ultimately was as the guy in the rubber suit in the movies in the 60s and 70s.
Sure. Now, wasn't he? I mean, how often did they redesign the suit? Because I feel like almost every film was slightly different variations on Godzilla.
I think that's true. Probably to a large degree, to get kids like me to buy a bunch more toys.
Right.
But yeah, there were little tweaks. I think there are general. For instance, this guy here. Let's bring him down a little bit more. Let's see how much you can see. Okay.
He was at Mardi Gras.
Is from he's very spiritual, and he's got his little Rosetta beads too.
Gotcha.
He is from Godzilla versus either Biollante from the Biollante King Ghidorah era. Okay. So this is the first incarnation of Godzilla that comes back. But there's it's all right. There are but there's a stockier Godzilla that makes its appearance, little heavier, little thicker, longer tail,
right.
That shows up in some of the movies in the mid to late 90s. And then in Godzilla, I believe it's Godzilla versus Destroya, which comes out in what, 94, 95?
95, yep, correct, yeah.
Okay. Somewhere in that general area, which is at times sort of an Aliens ripoff, unfortunately.
Okay.
But is a pretty good film. That one also has Godzilla Jr. in it? Yes, and it's important. Godzilla Jr. is important to the point where I was getting to.
Oh, okay, great.
You were talking about the dramatic incarnation of Godzilla over time. This is a big transition period from the way Godzilla looks. In that movie, Godzilla's going nuclear. He's literally melting down. She is literally melting down. Godzilla, the Godzilla that we've seen from Biollante up until this point, is going to die. Okay. But in so doing, it takes Destroya with it. And then what happens is that there's the introduction in a movie or two earlier. I think Godzilla versus Space Godzilla introduces a baby Godzilla, or Godzilla Jr.
Yeah, little Godzilla is in Godzilla versus Space Godzilla 1994.
Right. Okay. So what happens is that they have this scene at the end where larger Godzilla has melted down, and its radioactive elements have basically turned baby Godzilla, or Godzilla Jr., into a larger Godzilla. However, it's not a Godzilla that's exactly the same size. It's a smaller Godzilla. And the reason they did this was for effects purposes, because they were having difficulty trying to match up how big Godzilla was supposed to be with the buildings that Godzilla was supposed to be around.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So for a practical effects reason, they decided to come up with a storyline that was going to propel Godzilla Jr. into being the main Godzilla in the remainder of these films. And
Gotcha.
That's what happened. So technically, Godzilla Jr. from Destroya on, from the movies beyond Destroya, it's the kid. It's not the parent.
Right.
And that Godzilla is the one that goes to battle with some of the other monsters, with all of the other monsters from that point on.
Right.
Up until when they closed the franchise in 2004.
Right. So okay. So how many Godzillas have there been, and do they explain?
That's the only explanation.
Okay. So because the original one now in the 1954 Godzilla, Gojira, is destroyed by the
Oxygen Destroyer.
The poorly named Oxygen Destroyer.
Yes.
Yeah. lazily named. I mean, they're scientists. They're not.
Right.
They're not marketing people.
Right.
So yeah. So but then in Godzilla Raids Again,
Hmm.
they explain that he's a different creature, or is it just oh fuck, it's Godzilla?
Yes. Oh fuck, it's Godzilla.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's it. There's no explanation. However, there could be a theory.
And yeah, this is a theory that you've discussed before.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so is this? Let's throw people to see the. If you go to our original Film Geek Primer episodes, there is a one labeled "Discussion with Schu." There's an actual Godzilla episode where Schu discusses the more deeper kind of origin theories of Godzilla. But then there's a separate discussion where he lays out his theory on Godzilla, why Minya, sorry, Minya is around, because there's the whole thing about is Godzilla male, is Godzilla female, how does any of this stuff work, and you posit your theory with, I believe, zero evidence in that piece, but it is a hell of a theory.
Or total evidence.
Nothing but evidence. You're right. There
Yes.
could be so much evidence we can't even see it.
Precisely. Yes, that's it. That's exactly right. And I think that's the way to go about it. Total evidence. There's no question that this is almost the Jesse Ventura conspiracy theory of Godzilla films. Okay. All right. I'm going Alex Jones on Godzilla right now. Okay. First Godzilla, Oxygen Destroyer. That Godzilla is male. What we don't see from that movie is that there's already a female Godzilla, because how do you have a baby Godzilla? Okay?
Yeah.
Probably got to have a male, probably got to have a female. First movie is male, the male gets killed. Mother Godzilla now has to figure out what the hell to do, and is looking for husband who she's afraid bought a pack of cigarettes and never came back home, and just kind of drifted off into, some, Sin City version of Monster Island, probably hanging out in Las Vegas or something like that, which coincidentally the new Godzilla apparently just completely ramshacks.
Really?
Makes a
Oh,
mess out of
interesting.
it. Yeah. Makes a complete mess. So, maybe this all comes full circle, but from the second movie on, up until Destroya, that's not a he, that's a she.
Okay.
And this explains why Godzilla is sometimes pissed, sometimes on your side, and sometimes you can't figure it out.
Yeah, I see.
And then, unfortunately, everything goes Half-Life. So Godzilla goes nuclear at the end of Destroyer. The female goes nuclear at the end of Destroyer. Now you have Godzilla Jr.
Right.
Now, we don't know if Godzilla Jr. is male or female. Really don't know. So I guess it depends in future incarnations just exactly how consistent Godzilla acts. And then we can probably determine more accurately from that.
So of the second generation series, starting in 1989 with the Godzilla versus Biollante.
Biollante to Final Wars.
To Final Wars, yeah. Which one do you feel of that bunch is probably the best?
Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah.
Okay. And that
also known as GMK. I think that one came out in 99 or 2000.
Godzilla versus Destroyer.
A little further.
2001. Godzilla, Mothra, and Giant Monster All Out Attack. That one.
Yeah. That movie is. Some people would argue that that's the best of the Godzilla movies. Period.
Really.
I think it is. It's easily in the top 5. And
okay.
I think a lot of the later ones are solid.
Yeah.
They're I think more consistent than the first generation of films. The first generation has pockets that are pretty good at the time for what they are, and then you have some real good nuggets like Destroy All Monsters and a couple in the King Ghidorah films. Basically, the Honda movies are pretty good.
Right.
Okay.
Hold on one second.
All right. GMK is the best of that bunch, and I think it's the best of that bunch by far.
Okay.
If you wanted to compact and save time a little bit, and look back to a Godzilla movie that you want, if you wanted to pick, let's say, 2 from the first generation, I would pick the first Godzilla and Destroy All Monsters.
Okay.
I would pick Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah as the best of the films in the second group. And then maybe go something like Destroya, but I could be talked into any of a number of others that were in that are solid that are in that group as well. But GMK is the movie in that second generation that I would absolutely recommend.
Gotcha. Okay, so worst.
Godzilla vs. King Kong is by far the worst Godzilla film. It's unwatchable. There is a story also that has long since been debunked that the American version had King Kong winning. That's the version that we always saw, and the Japanese version had Godzilla winning. That's not true. There's only a King Kong winning version. If it was only for that, it would be the worst Godzilla movie made.
Right.
So clearly, it's absolutely impractical
right.
on that merit alone.
Right.
Okay. But it's an effects nightmare. It's slow. It's incompetently put together. It's just a really poor film. That's the one that you just avoid it. If you don't need to be a completionist, avoid that one at all costs.
Interesting.
In the second generation, maybe Space Godzilla.
Okay.
And Space Godzilla as a monster is kind of cool. I really don't dislike a whole heck of a lot of the second ones. I think some, again, some are better than others, but I think they're generally fairly strong.
Passable, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They're passable.
And
obviously, and obviously in that discussion we're not putting the Devlin and Emmerich disaster.
Sure, it's funny actually because.
But the Devlin and Emmerich film is just horrible.
Yeah, that's actually what I wanted to ask you next, because that was, there was a huge push for the Devlin Emmerich film, and it is just as a person who likes movies, it's horrible. It's really disappointing for the Godzilla world, and for Toho, because Toho. Do you know if Toho, because Toho leases the character out, right?
Yeah. Toho. Devlin and Emmerich, to their credit, and I think more of this is Dean Devlin than it is Roland Emmerich.
Yeah.
Devlin at the time could sell.
Right.
And they had just come off
Independence Day.
And Egypt in the desert.
Yeah. Stargate, right.
Yeah, Stargate. And so they were hot.
Right.
And they convinced Toho that they could make a really good Godzilla film, and Toho went along with it.
Right.
So to their credit, one of the things that, and it was an interesting time as I was kind of fascinated with different aspects of the movie industry. Their ability to pitch an idea in that window, I thought was clearly their strong point.
Right.
They could get into meetings and had a way of getting their point across and wowing producers quickly. And I always was fascinated with how they did that when you then looked at the product that they put together, which more often than not was really a complete disaster.
Right. Literally.
They had excellent ideas. There are some good ideas that just were terrible.
Sure. And if you look at, to some extent, if you look at Independence Day, it is it is a mashup of every other alien invasion movie that's ever hit.
Yes.
But it's also incredibly universal. It's one of those things that it's so base that there isn't a single person in the world that wouldn't be able to get what was going on or get the characters or anything like that.
I think perhaps, and I think what happened there is that Devlin and Emmerich were so inspired by Spielberg.
Sure.
That they wanted to Spielberg and Lucas. That they wanted to make Spielberg and Lucas karaoke, but they did it 15 years later when that had already been done for 15 consecutive years.
Right.
So their version of that film looked like it was a Xerox copy.
Right.
So now to their credit, I think Stargate's okay, and it made a lot of money.
Right.
And Independence Day made a crap load of money. I think Independence Day's a lousy, it's a by-the-books film. I think it's largely not very good.
I'll tell you what. In its defense, I will say it is a great laundry movie. Like, it's something that you can easily put on and play while you're doing your laundry and cleaning up the house and everything else like that. And it'll, every time you glance over, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that bit.
And I guess it's perfectly acceptable summer fare. But I don't come away from Independence Day thinking, man, that's the movie that completely and utterly inspired me to make film.
Yeah.
However, coincidentally, if you want to torture yourself and watch Pacific Rim again, Pacific Rim is Independence Day.
Yes.
It almost lifts the key components to Independence Day. So here's a guy who can branch out and and has the potential to make a pretty damn good monster / Japanese robot film. And the template from which he borrows is by the guys who did the worst Godzilla movie and completely bastardized the franchise for American audiences.
Yeah. Yeah, and I always wonder with Pacific Rim, I always wonder if it's one of those that it's so much money and to some extent is a risk because it's it's not in today's day and age, it's not based off a comic book, it doesn't have a brand or a franchise or anything that already has a giant support group. It's an original IP theoretically that it had to be so safe because that's the only way they could get the funding for it, which in the end is its biggest detriment.
Right. Right, and maybe that's a lot of it.
Yeah.
But to be safe in a way that falls back and flat out lifts key points and key sequences from, of all things, Independence Day is really an odd choice in safety from a safety standpoint.
Agreed.
And I think clearly they could have done it a lot better. Is it a niche film? Yeah, I get all of that. I get that a lot of people out there aren't into Japanese monsters and aren't into Japanese robots. Okay, sure. I get that. Cool. I get that you can see it as a risk in that regard, but you definitely could have put together a better product and made more money and gotten better feedback as a result, as opposed to what it was ultimately. What you ultimately decided to do, which again was basically remake, I guess for the time, even though I don't, a very recognizable summer film from nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, and it's odd because nothing that Guillermo del Toro has done up until that point would have given me any clue that he would actually make something that banal. Is right. And it's shocking. It's one of those movies that it's so. It's so vanilla, it's so down the line that it actually makes me question his other films a little bit. I'm like, wait a minute, have I been missing something here? Is it, are we praising him for the wrong reasons? Is something going,
I think, you know what, oddly enough, I would suggest that maybe we are. I think a lot of his films are, and maybe it's a different, quirkier version of Devlin and Emmerich. I think he's better than Devlin and Emmerich.
Sure, of course.
But I think very often his quirkiness and the unique perspective on general character ideas is actually better than his characterizations, better than his plot, and better than his films. I think there's a lot of shell game eye candy that Del Toro presents, and I think a lot of that was unfortunately exposed in Pacific Rim, which is a movie that I went into and really wanted to enjoy.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I would agree with you 100% on that. Only because Pan's Labyrinth and oh my God, what's the Ghost, the Spanish one? It's funny, all his foreign language films, and maybe it's a foreign language thing. I don't know. But then again, they're also movies that he's been able to find funding that isn't American, so he doesn't have to constrict himself to the American guidelines of filmmaking in an odd way of storytelling, right? So I can't believe I can't think of what the Spanish orphanage with the
you'll come up with it in a moment.
Yeah, I probably will.
But Pan's Labyrinth is a movie that, interestingly, I don't know, I find it to be better in concept and weird monstrosity than I do as an actual film. And to me, that is kind of a fallback feeling that I have about a lot of his projects. And I absolutely feel this way about Hellboy.
Right.
And I like Hellboy, but I come out of Hellboy thinking Hellboy could have been better.
Right.
And that I think is the thing. Maybe I hold him up to another standard, but I feel like there's a lot of really I feel like he's got me watching the cool monsters and the neat imagination, and in the process of that, he's trying to cover up that there really isn't, the story isn't really jumping off the page at me. And I feel as though I feel as though the product more often than not is a lot emptier than I'd like.
Right.
Hate mail, by the way, for all you Del Toro lovers out there, at Shuniverse on Twitter.
Right. So, okay, so then we are now coming up to, we are a week away from the new Godzilla film coming out, so we'll wrap this up. Feelings, thoughts, how many of the trailers, how many of the clips have you seen, how much, you know?
Couple.
Yeah.
I don't go out of my way to, look and dissect every scene, every screenshot in, every trailer to see how many other potential other monsters might be tossed in.
Sure.
When the movie comes out, I'll check it out. But what they've done with the effects and how they've laid out the trailers, I think have been very good. I think the people involved in this project care about
Godzilla.
Yeah. I think they care about Godzilla. I think they see an opportunity to do something that maybe clearly hasn't been done from an effect standpoint to this level, and the type of story they can tell. We'll see how it ultimately is. It appears that it definitely, one of the things that concerns me is that its underlying storyline, and they've done this in some of their marketing too, where they have hashtag demand to know.
Right.
It's kind of like, okay, so you're gonna work hard to convince me in this movie that a massive monster has more or less been isolated on some Pacific island for a long period of time, and it's more or less there's government knowledge about it, and what is it that are we once again going to go through the process where the government is evil and the government is hiding stuff for us, and we are ultimately just victims in this grand conspiracy that comes back and bites us in the ass? Maybe what I want to see is just a monster kicking shit out of stuff.
Sure.
Without any great, woe is, it's and so some of the storyline aspect of it maybe concerns me a little bit, but I'm definitely looking forward to it. I think the effects are going to be very good, and I think they go into this project caring about it, and I'm hopeful that it delivers in a positive way for good future Godzilla movies down the road.
Yeah, I would be fascinated to see if we actually get a Godzilla franchise out of it. That would be a first time. I mean, that would be a first time in America, which would be pretty cool. And it's interesting you bring up the whole little victim thing, because of course I've talked to you about the weird American science fiction angle that I'm kind of coming to realize, which is we're always the victims in these things. Nothing has ever happened because of our actions, versus the original Godzilla is very much about that. It's about Godzilla's attacks and temperate rage and everything else is due to humanity's own issues and what we've done to ourselves, etc.
Yeah, but in those, it's like we're in it together.
Yes.
There's not a yes. And this is an interesting cultural dynamic. It's not the military was evil. It's not that America sucked. It's not that it was some grand scheme to try to be more corporate and more capitalistic and just have money in the end. This is, to them, and the way that Godzilla comes across, this is in essence a Pandora's box that we have unleashed.
Yep.
That we have to be really careful about.
Yep. And
we're in it together to keep it contained.
Yep.
Whereas it seems that outside of the Americanization of that always appears to have a victim and a human villain that did something that unleashed this beast, and had that person not done that for probably ultimately greed or power,
right,
then we'd all be safe, and it's the evil corporation's fault or the evil government's fault or the evil power broker's fault, as opposed to we just unleashed this bastard, we're all in this together, and we've got to get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, and really what's fascinating in the original Godzilla, the scientist who if you were to see him today, you would go, oh, this guy's the bad guy. He's got a scar, he's got a patch over his eye, he wears gloves all the time, he's always very secretive, and the white doctor's coat, you're instantly going, here's a fucking bad guy. But what his discovery is, which is truly evil, which is something that could wipe all humanity off the earth, he's trying to protect us from it. He doesn't want to he doesn't want to share his discovery because of what it can do. And he brings up, it's like, once the information on the A-bomb is released, everybody has it. Once the information on the H-bomb is released, everybody has it. Now all we're doing is, all we're doing is building up arsenals to destroy each other. And if this thing gets out, what is this but yet another weapon that everybody is going to start building and having and guaranteeing that they will destroy us with? So it's really interesting. The mad scientist is not a mad scientist as much. Well, he's driven mad by his own fears of what his discovery will entail, and what its outcome will be, and is struggling to find an answer that can be a
satisfactory, in a way that really there is no satisfaction.
Yeah.
And it's and you also watch the Raymond Burr version, which is the American recut, and got a significantly different tone out of it.
It's very much a different, completely different tone. It's the classic science fiction. We're being attacked. We're the victims. Attitude to it. Whereas, like you said, like in the original, it very much is, as you've said before, it's about the folly of man. We've brought this upon ourselves. We need to figure out how to deal with this solution. Whereas in this one, it's just like, we tested the bombs, and all of a sudden this guy's coming to get us, and we're all fucked, and poor us. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, we'll report it.
And there's a lot of it's not our fault.
Yeah, there's a lot of it's not our fault. And the scientist's speech in the American version, his dubbing is, instead of it being this, he does this great speech about, look at what we've done, look at what humanity has done with these items when we discover them, we destroy we destroy each other. Instead, it's just simply, do you know what will happen if the oxygen destroyer ends up in the wrong hands? And that's it. There's no bigger meaning out of it or anything like that. It's just simply the very pat, if this gets in the wrong hands, look at this, we're all victims again.
Does that bother you about the American direction, or a long trail of American sci-fi approach, that there's kind of a class warfare victimization element to it?
It's weird, yes and no. I mean, yes, it does. It bothers me because it bothers me as a person going, okay, for some reason in movies like this, we don't want to use any of the bad guys as metaphors for something that's going on, and kind of show how we need to stand up for ourselves. We need to stop being pussies or whatever the hell it is we're doing. But even just from a basic storytelling point, the alien invasion, and like all the Emmerich Devlin stuff, right? All of that stuff is just simply is we are the victims to something that we cannot control. And it's kind of a bummer that most of the time films don't decide to use these invasions or anything else. Pacific Rim did the same thing, as some kind of other metaphor, as the reason why they're doing this, what's happening, what have we done. So kind of that can kind of look at humanity as a whole and what our part in this is, because nobody. They always use the thing, well, they need to colonize our planet because they're running out of water, or they're doing this, or
right,
doing
resources,
that, right?
whatever.
Yeah. And it is a and it's that to me is it's a cliche now. It's just really lazy storytelling. And it would be really great to find out that, well, really great, but it's like, what have we done? It's especially in today's day and age, after 9/11 and everything else like that, it's, oh my God, we're the victims, when really we created the monster. And this is something, this is a very public knowledge, very modern piece of human history that we continually want to deny. And it's weird because especially with the truthers and stuff like that, even they want to say we're a victim of some other mighty cell, versus all of us are kind of responsible for what we've done. All of us are in this together, and we've all played a part, minor, major, whatever. Just and I don't want to get political on because we didn't vote, because we didn't do this, because we didn't pay attention to what somebody was doing, and demand justice be properly minced out. Shit went bad. I mean, the entire, bubble bursting in, was it 2007, 2008?
Yeah, 2008, right.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that came from us. A lot of that came from bills that we allowed to be passed. And then the aftermath of that, with nobody going to prison, with nobody being, with slaps on the wrists, are also because we are allowing that to happen.
Well, it also, I think, again, without not delving into that aspect too much, hey, we also bankrolled more than we could afford. A lot of that's specifically on us. That's on, but it's from a political narrative and from an American storytelling narrative, victimization works.
Yes.
And it works well in the sci-fi realm as well. So if you're a politician out there trying to make a point, you're not going to say, you know what, you fucked up too. You're going to blame it on Madoff.
Sure.
And in our sci-fi storytelling, you're going to say, well, the little guy here, you're just trying to make a living. It's not your fault. You know, instead of saying, in essence, we're in this together. Now you got to get it done.
Yeah.
And there seems to be an interesting blame game that, it would be interesting perhaps to see more, say, Japanese monster films if they dealt with that theme as opposed to being the more generic cookie cutter sort of big monster thing comes in, now got to beat big. How they ultimately approach that, I think, more often than not, while there are certainly there are plenty of environmental messages in Japanese monster and Japanese robot films.
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally.
And shows. Plenty. Yeah. They're big on the environment. We're going to screw up the environment thing. Interesting if they were big on this 40 and 45 years ago.
Right.
But rarely, I think, does it go beyond. It's very much a we need to do something about that more than it's the evil guy's fault for making that happen.
Right.
Sort of thing. And that seems to be a little bit of the difference in, ultimately in the storytelling approach. It's very easy to create conflict by having some sort of class warfare in your conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, which is kind of a bummer because that would open up just, not even like trying to teach people a lesson, not even anything like that. It would open up storytelling ideas a lot. We could easily go in there and dig through all of the situations of the past 30, 40 years and find lots of great little nuggets on why, the monsters, anything else that we want to have are attacking, are invading, and just, it would open up storytelling. That's all. That's just kind of how I feel about it. And that's,
and it wouldn't be a bad approach at all. There are definitely some specific ways that sci-fi storytelling goes through the process, and in that regard, I suspect that Godzilla, which opens in just a few days, is going to be much more similar to most of its other American fare than it's going to be different.
Yeah. And that's, I think I agree with you, unfortunately, on that weird little fear. Hopefully we're wrong.
At the very least, it's well done,
Yeah. At the very least, it's well done. And honestly, how can it possibly be worse than the 98 version?
It won't be. Yeah. It won't be.
So yeah.
So that's one small Godzilla step.
Yep.
In the right direction.
Wow. Very nice.
Hey.
Very nice. I like what's with the little white spot? Is that like funky? It's like he's got gray chest hair on him or something.
The white spot also let me see if you can see the spikes back here. The white spot and the spikes light up when Godzilla's about to release the ray.
Right.
Yeah,
which I did not. It had been years because I saw the 54 version the other night for the first time in years, and I had totally forgotten that actually they even do that in that very first film. I mean, his character is pretty much his powers, everything else like that are defined in that first film.
And but the first time that comes up, it's like, oh, holy crap! Now we've amped it up a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I think they do a really good job of in that film, as kind of like, and we're already getting screwed here by something we can't stop, and now it's got something else.
Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, this is not good.
And there's one really good bit that it would be considered hokey today, maybe. And I think the beauty of the 1954 version is there is so much imagery that is based off of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, there are shots, it's the flash and everybody falling and dropping to the ground kind of stuff, all of the Geiger counter stuff. there's a woman in one of the shots whose face is tremendously scarred, and it had to have been from either the one of the bombings of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, or from the hundreds of thousands of tons of dynamite we dropped on them. And then there's even a reference, and I don't know why this kind of really caught me, was that this is the Godzilla world is a world where Nagasaki and Hiroshima did take place. World War II had taken place because there's a girl mentions it on the subway, that how she'd gotten, she'd run away from Nagasaki. She's going to find a way to run away and survive this ordeal as well. And that to me was really kind of fascinating. Anyways, during the giant Godzilla attack just over the halfway point in the 1954 film, there is a mother and her two little children, who are huddled in just underneath this little building awning, and basically they're crying, and mom's like, it's okay, we're going to be with daddy again soon. And the references that dad is dead, and they're going to be joining him in little Japanese heaven. And it's one of those things where I wouldn't say it feels hokey today, but it kind of does. It's a little, it's a little kind of direct and in your face. But watching that, you're just kind of like, it's so, with all the other Hiroshima imagery that's taking place, it really has an awkward effect still. It's still really kind of shocking that, you would never see in any monster film or anything like that today, you'll never see people kind of being humanized all of a sudden before they're killed. You'll have people run and gets crushed, or it's an evil lawyer, right, who gets eaten by a dinosaur. It's somebody who deserves it, or it's somebody who you don't take as a human being, just as a prop, so you can go, it's crushed. But all of a sudden, this one little moment, they decide to take a random person who you've never met before, you've never seen this person or her family before, and they just quickly go, this is the end. It's going to be okay, kids. We're going to be with Daddy in heaven again soon. And it's kind of crushing. It in that one little thing, it populates that world. It all of a sudden makes you realize that everybody there has a past, has something, has love, has things they want to hold on to and live for, and that's just not going to happen for a lot of these people. Those little model trucks are going to turn over, and those little model people in there are going to die, even though they're little action figures. But yeah, it was a really it's a very solid, it's a very good film. The 54 Godzilla is a great movie. And a lot of times people are going to scoff and giggle at it because of the rudimentary special effects that are used, right? Because they're really kind of neat because they're tangible. It's like you can see the humanity that goes into making them and making them work, and the people, you can feel it. It's tactile, but it's still little Tonka trucks and stuff like that they bought at the store to plant around the set.
Right.
So that kind of thing is always kind of a bit of a bummer, but the film is so skillfully made every other way that it's really forgivable. It's kind of, I hope that people don't watch it, or if they do go in to want to watch the original Godzilla as a campy film and go, it's just a big man in a rubber suit, as we've, and we all do the, man in suit. Everybody loves that aspect. But it's there's actual depth and concern and character in this original film, and I just hope that doesn't go unseen by today's group, especially the fact that it's black and white too. Little shits don't like black and white movies. I don't know why. Anyways, the 54 film though is incredibly impressive. The Raymond Burr recut of it is incredibly unimpressive. To the point where it's horribly done. The inserts are just awful, and there's a bit where they do this weird thing with I don't know why they decided to do this. They do this really crappy thing with the dubbing, where they will have, within a scene, some of it will be dubbed and some of it won't, and it's so jarring on the soundtrack. It's Godzilla King of the Monsters, the Raymond Burr one, is the worst possible introduction and way that you could probably be introduced to a Godzilla film. So that's really all I got to say about that one.
Well done. There's an interesting, before we go out, you were talking about that scene in the 1954 version. There's an interesting version in GMK, which, again, I rank very highly in the Godzilla canon.
Sure.
Where Godzilla is more natural disaster or more fate, okay?
Right.
So there's a scene where Godzilla is moving through the city and causing havoc and damage and the rest of it. And there's this young girl who's in a hospital bed, okay? And the rest of the hospital's been evacuated because they're getting the hell out of the way of Godzilla, all right? And she's stuck in the bed. There's nothing she can do. She cannot move. She's in that bed, and it's completely out of her hands, all right? And Godzilla walks right by and destroys other buildings around her, and you take this deep breath and you think, wow, that person made it, and then the back of the tail sweeps through,
Oh, Jesus.
wrecks out the building, and you know that it took her out.
Oh,
And it's a really interesting, this is what fate is like scene,
Yeah.
and fate and natural disaster and those inanimate aspects, it doesn't matter, and this is where maybe the Japanese perspective is a little bit different than the American perspective because like you said, the American who's in that position always deserves it.
right.
But in a different culture's perspective, there's a much more honest portrayal of it could happen to anybody at any time, and maybe there's not a damn thing
Yeah.
you can do about it because it doesn't discriminate.
Right.
Whatever this is, if you're there, you're done, and it's all about luck. It's
Right.
out of your hands. It's out of your control. It's fate and luck. And it was, I thought, a really well done, harsh scene, but really well done, and I think did a nice job of setting the tone throughout a good portion of that film.
Nice. Nice. So, yeah, so GMK. Worth
There you
it.
go.
Yeah.
Hope that helped, and I think you and I both hope that the movie is really good.
Yeah, fingers crossed, right? So, people can find you where?
Shuniverse works.
Shuniverse.
SCHU Universe. SCHU Universe. You can track me down there, and have at it.
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crafty.
Yeah. Well, not as crafty as you. I didn't have to. You nailed it.
Yeah.
You got
Okay.
John Santo.
I know,
that's
yeah.
pretty,
That's what happens when I'm early to the game, I guess.
you go cutting edge.
Yeah. So, anyways, I can be reached at John Santo. Don't forget to join us every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Pacific for Film Geek Primer Live. Schu, thank you very much, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for the conversation.
No problem. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. All right, folks. We'll talk soon.